a conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near, and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, as is Murjani Rawls. Today we are talking about Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. I don't know why you really need that subtitle, but it is there nonetheless. And Murjani, I know this was one we've kind of gone back and forth on for a while because I was like, I really don't want to rewatch it. And then I ended up finally buying it so that I could have the Ultimate Edition, which is what we watched for this one. But for you, how many times had you seen this before the podcast?
The first time I saw it was in movie theater. So I went to go see Batman vs. Superman with a couple friends of mine who I see comic book movies all the time with, right? Uh-huh. So I get in, we see the movie, and I absolutely hated it. It's not that I hated it. It's just that there were so much happened in the theatrical cut that doesn't really get context. I'm sure when we talk about the opening scene where Lois is in Africa, like, if you watch that in the theatrical scene, like, you'll be like, what just happened? So, like, there's so many characters and there's so many themes and everything like that, and I was just like, I sat and I remember when I wrote the review, I gave it like a 6 out of 10. I was like, I don't really know about this movie. After being like super, super excited for it, especially I think when everybody saw the Comic-Con reveal with like the Superman logo with Batman logo behind it, you're like, what? And then, you know, they casted Ben Affleck. I was like, oh my God, like this is going to be incredible. And then, you know, so I saw that. Then I took some time away from it. Then I watched the theatrical cut again. Then down the line, I saw the Ultimate cut. And then I'm like, okay, I get it. This movie actually is a lot better than I thought. I saw Zack Snyder's complete vision in this cut that we watched. And I'm like, I get it. I get why. And, you know, if you hadn't heard me on the, you know, Man of Steel episode, it's no surprise that I'm a huge Superman fan. And there's a tonal shift that happens with him between Man of Steel and this movie.
Yeah.
You know, Batman within this movie is very dark. There's a lot of dark tones in this movie. There's shimmers of light when they show Superman, but for most of the movie, Superman's persecuted. Superman is down in the dumps. Clark is like fiddling with basically what he did in Man of Steel, and initially I didn't like that, but then I got it. Like, I'm like, okay, I see the bigger picture. So before watching the Ultimate Cut for this podcast, I probably watched it twice, and I really do like it. I really do kind of get the whole scope of the vision. And with Zack Snyder movies, his ultimate cuts are usually his initial cut that he wants to show. At that point, I mean, I don't know if a lot of people were down to kind of like sit in the theater for 3 hours, because this is a 3-hour movie. Or the Ultimate Edition is about like 181 minutes or something like that. But like, this was like pre-Endgame, you know, Infinity War. Like, I mean, but yeah, I probably watched it twice. And the theatrical I watched twice.
Yeah, I had only seen the theatrical version once before watching the Ultimate one, because I don't even remember if I saw it in theaters. I'm like 50% sure I did, but also 50% unsure where I ended up watching this. But I remembered a good amount of the third act, I would say. And a lot of stuff before the third act there, I was just like, wait, Lois went where? What's going on?
It's a lot of mishmash. It's a lot of mishmash in the theatrical cut.
Yeah, so I really did not like this the first time I saw it. I think I gave it a 2 out of 5. So
I remember that.
Your 6 out of 10 seems pretty generous from my point of view.
Yeah, it may have been, I think the review. It may have been a 5.8. It may have been that.
Yeah.
Like, it, yeah.
But once I watched the ultimate cut, it was sort of like, okay, this is much more cohesive. There are still some weird story beats in it, and there's a particular scene that I want to discuss later on when we get more into the story and everything. But just right off the bat, even though it was 3 hours, it didn't really feel like 3 hours, which was nice because I was like, okay, this flows better than the theatrical version. So in a sense, the theatrical version feels like it drags on longer than the ultimate one, even though there's like 30 extra minutes of content. And because I hadn't seen the theatrical version in so long, I didn't even really know what was and wasn't there. But one of the first things I noticed was how this overlaps with the events from Man of Steel. So DC was certainly trying to make this a connected universe. Here's Superman and Batman living in the same world, and then later on you get the inclusion of Wonder Woman, you see the Flash, Cyborg, Aquaman, you have all of these little tidbits leading into Justice League, and it didn't feel super forced for that stuff. It was just like, hey, you know, Lex has been working on this thing. Here's what we uncovered, or here's what Bruce uncovered anyway. And you kind of get the sense that they really wanted this connected universe to work, but because of how high the stakes were in this, I feel like it was going to be even harder for Justice League to follow up. And, you know, Justice League is one I have not been so eager to rewatch. I will do that eventually.
You're not the only one.
Like rewatching this paid off because I did give it a bump in the rating. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 when I watched this version because you can see where Zack Snyder wanted to go. And ironically, the day we are recording this, he's doing a commentary on the movie. And I think he might be doing the ultimate cut for the commentary. I'm not 100% sure, but it's just funny how this movie is sort of popping back up again. And I think because we're kind of eagerly awaiting Matt Reeves' Batman movie, it's kind of like, okay, maybe it's a good time to revisit some of these things. And plus, you know, quarantine. So we have the time to be watching 3-hour movies again for this podcast. But I do want to dive into the story because really anyone who is familiar with this movie is already going to be familiar with the cast because you had probably seen Man of Steel. You know, Henry Cavill, Superman. Ben Affleck is Bruce Wayne / Batman, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, or Gal Gadot, I'm not sure which one. But anyway, you have these 3 main people who kind of are supposed to be the pillars of this universe. But I feel like when you throw in someone like Jesse Eisenberg as Lex, it kind of throws things off a little. Did you feel that Lex's presence kind of threw off the balance of the story a little bit, even though he obviously has a place in the story?
See, here's the thing. Like, when I watched the theatrical cut, I was like, I don't know about Jesse Eisenberg as, like, this quirky, like, neurotic take on Lex Luthor. Before then, you had Gene Hackman, and then you had who shall not be named.
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey as, you know, Lex Luthor too, even though, like, with his history and he was actually a good Lex Luthor, I thought. But, like, rewatching the ultimate cut and kind of, like, taking notes and doing all the story beats, I actually liked his performance a little more because Lex Luthor's character, you know, throughout the comics, he's fascinated with Superman because Superman is like this godlike figure, and basically, like, Lex wants that power. You know what I mean? Like, Lex is supremely intelligent, but he can't be Superman. And I felt in the movie here that Lex was just an extension of all the people who are afraid of what Superman can do. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was a little wonky how he, like, tried to turn Superman and Batman against each other. Like, I thought, like, everything with the notes, I was like, man, like, these guys, Clark and Bruce are intelligent. Like, Bruce is a detective. You know what I mean? Like, I know that he had this burning hatred for Superman, but I'm like, can't they just talk this out? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why do they have to fight? Like, this is what I thought in the initial theatrical cut, but I like Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor
a little
bit more. Like, he basically is he goes in this maniacal space with this obsession of Superman, turning everybody against each other. He's like the background guy who are playing people like chess pieces to turn the world against Superman. And it was already there, because when you have an alien that can seemingly do anything, and like the lady said in the beginning, she's like, I don't think Superman, and he's not going to answer to you. I don't even think he answers to God. There's this inherent fear there with humans, with, you know, if something appears that seems to be different, or something that seems more powerful that reminds us of our humanity, we tend to reject it. And I think that, like, you know, Lex Luthor's character here is basically that invisible thing that is driving that fear.
I did think his performance was a little too over the top for my liking.
Yeah, it was a little over the top, I thought.
There were some weird beats there, like when he was giving that speech and it was supposed to be about libraries or something, and he just sort of went off and then just kind of kept pausing. And I was like, this is not something that I felt like Lex would do, because Lex is very meticulous about his thoughts, and at least from the other versions that we've seen, he plans everything out. But Jesse Eisenberg's version of Lex, you're kind of just like, oh, he's just kind of doing things on whims instead of really thinking them through. And he gets so obsessed with Superman. I think that is why he is the way he is in this movie. And another thing I didn't enjoy quite as much is the fact that Bruce just plays right into his hand. And it's like, okay, come on. We know, like you said, that Bruce is a detective. So it feels like that part of Bruce's hatred towards Superman was a little irrational, because he was almost treating Superman like as the guy who killed his parents.
Here's the thing, and this is kind of like rewatching the Ultimate Cut and kind of getting the full scope of what Zack Snyder wanted to do, and Chris Terrio and David Goyer, how they were writing Batman and Bruce Wayne's character. Like, I tried not to view it in the mindset of Christopher Nolan's, and then like everybody, like I tried to detach it. So basically, like, Batman is, I mean, of course he's a vigilante and everything, but Batman is basically, through years and years of losing people, fighting these criminals, and, you know, losing his family, and watching like all this destruction happen, especially with, you know, the events that happened in Man of Steel. He has become basically the Dark Knight Returns Batman, where like he's just older and brooding, and maybe he turns away from his creed. He doesn't kill anybody. He still has that creed, right? But like, he's branding people. He's framed, especially when we first see Batman.
But does he not kill anyone? Because he sure blows up a lot of cars with people in them.
Well, here's the thing. Towards the end, where he's rescuing Martha Kent, he surely kills a lot of people.
Okay. Okay. So just wanted to make sure we're on the same page there.
Yeah, like, initially, he kills, like, I mean, he throws a crate at a guy. You know what I mean? I don't think that he's going to get back up and walk away from that. He's framed as basically more of a horror villain. Like, when Clark initially goes to Gotham City to do that, like, sports story, he asks, and like, the townspeople are really talking about Bruce or Batman as this like specter of like almost like Jason. Like, I was like, oh wow, like, you know what I mean? Like, he's only targeted people that need to be targeted and things like that. I think the lesson that the movie is trying to teach is that once you're drunk on anger and you're drunk on rage, and it goes with that monologue that he said, that Alfred says to Bruce, like, you know, it starts the fever that turned good men cruel. When they're watching what happens in Man of Steel, you kind of throw away all logic, because like, if anybody could see, I mean, this is more towards the audience and not the characters in the film. Anybody could see that Superman is trying to do the right thing, even though it seems like he's in the wrong place at the wrong time almost every single instance in this movie. You know what I mean? Like, he's trying to do the right thing, and since Bruce is so drunk on hatred and the need to have an adversary, you know what I mean, he kind of just detaches himself from all logic.
I think this story made it jarring for a lot of people who are so used to Batman being the hero who refuses to use guns, refuses to kill people. And while obviously Superman isn't out here killing a ton of people without real reason, you know, General Zod was someone that no one else would be able to stop. And he was going to kill this family right in front of Superman. So his choices in that moment were very limited. And he understood that if he didn't make that choice, Zod would just keep coming back and coming back and coming at him, because they probably don't even have a place that can really contain him. He would have had to be sent to the Phantom Zone, and then we would have had to have like this whole other movie where Superman was figuring that stuff out, because in Man of Steel, he was very much in the early stages of figuring out who Zod was, why he's here, what's going on, the history of Krypton that he couldn't really remember, and there was just so much that they couldn't account for, that to have Batman then take this sudden turn seemingly, because it's not like we got a Ben Affleck Batman movie before this. We don't really see him spiraling down into that darkness. I mean, we do within this movie, but to get to where we first see him as Batman in this, we don't really get that beforehand. And I think it was a lot to put into one movie, even with the 3-hour cut.
It may be a little bit more different for me because The Dark Knight Rises is like my favorite Batman story. Like Batman coming back after this hiatus because like Gotham's overrun by the mutants, but he's just like this older, like more muscular, maybe slower, but he has the more brute version of himself. Like, you know what I mean?
So did you feel like this was more a continuation of Christian Bale's Batman than a whole restart for him?
No.
Okay.
I because there's a very finite thing with Christian Bale's Batman, and I felt like if you look back to Christian Bale's Batman and what Christopher Nolan did, it seemed like Christopher Nolan. I love those movies. Listen, I love Batman Begins. I love Dark Knight is one of the greatest comic book movies of all time.
I'll admit it's been a minute since I've watched The Dark Knight Rises, so I do know that it had like this very finalized ending. Like you said, they knew this was going to be the end of Bale's Batman, and it seems like at that time they didn't really know who would play Batman next or what kind of story would come next. So the fact that, you know, Ben Affleck only had this movie and Justice League really to develop the character, it feels like it did a disservice to the character. Well,
for what I understand, like Man of Steel was the start of what would be the DCEU. And then it was just kind of continued, and which ironically, like Christopher Nolan was the producer on. You know, for what I've read, like they wanted Christopher Nolan to be like the Kevin Feige of the DCU, and he was like, no, like once I do this Man of Steel thing, I'm gone. I'm making like movies like, you know, Interstellar and things like that, which I understand. Like he already said that he was going to do. He didn't necessarily even want to do Dark Knight Returns, so like they had to get him back for that. But with this and with Batman vs Superman, it was introducing Batman as is he was already existing within this within, you know, Man of Steel. Like and Man of Steel, they show. During the fight, they showed the Wayne Tower like sign in the background, and like
the one in Metropolis.
So, like for me, I understand like if you aren't really necessarily familiar with the Dark Knight Returns storyline, and basically them, you know, Zack Snyder kind of interjecting Bruce from, he's been in Gotham for 20 years, like he's been at this, he's lost Jason Todd, like you saw the suit. The suit and the hand of the Joker. It could be a little bit jarring. It's like, there's so much history that just happened. You know what I mean? But like, I love that story. So I thought Ben Affleck was basically the perfect embodiment of it, especially from a Bruce standpoint, because we've seen that like Thomas and Martha Kent scene over and over and over again. Like, he was like, okay, we know that Bruce's family dies. Like we Joe Chill comes, shoots them. but it's shot in a Zack Snyder-like way, which, I mean, I think that his cinematography in this film is absolutely amazing, but that still haunts Bruce. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it still, the specter of his parents dying, like, him going to the grave, everything like that, like, it's still, like, with the character, he's still this, you know, sad, you know, like, will he ever find happiness thing? Like, that's a motif in the movie, too, I felt.
And he doesn't feel connected to Superman until he learns that his mother's name is also Martha.
That was, okay. When I saw that in the movies, I was like, what the hell? Like, this is like, I'm like, all right, man, like, this is a little, I understand that they're both their moms have, you know, name is Martha, great, blah, blah, blah. But when I first initially saw it, I'm like, what? I'm like, come on. Like, Martha! I was like, ugh. But then, like, I took a step back from it, and I'm like, okay, well, they were kind of building up to this a little bit, like, showing, like, the graves, and showing, like, him, you know, Martha getting gunned down. That basically called him back to humanity. Still, that scene is still...
It's a little cringeworthy because you're like, okay, you're only going to relate to him all of a sudden because his mother's name is Martha. Like, you weren't going to give him any mercy before you found that out. So that's what I meant earlier by he sort of just played right into Lex's hand, because he was counting on that anger from Batman, especially, to try and kill Superman. And even though his whole thing is he doesn't kill, I think for this story, it's coming out of a place of fear, because there's one specific scene I want to dive into a little bit here, and it's that apocalyptic scene when Bruce falls asleep at the Bat computer. And it was very jarring because you don't see Bruce fall asleep before we go into the scene. It's just like a sudden cut, and all of a sudden he's in this trench coat, and he kind of looks like, you know, this character from a totally different planet. You know, maybe this is not the same Earth that this Batman that we've been watching the entire movie is on, but it is. It's just his imagination going wild while he's sleeping, and this is what he thinks the world is going to look like if he doesn't take care of Superman. And it is super jarring, and one of those weird story beats where I was like, I don't think we needed this to be added in order to understand how Bruce was feeling about Superman. So, you know, there's this article I found from Vulture, I think, from a few years back that is literally just about the trench coat. So I will link to that in the show notes for anyone who wants to just sort of get a little look at that. But, you know, you can tell that comic books have definitely taken some influence from this movie, and maybe that scene in particular, because Last Night on Earth is kind of a similar looking Batman where he's wearing a trench coat and sort of just going through the horrible parts of the Earth that kind of look like this scene did in the movie.
Well, with that scene, they were alluding to the Nightmare storyline. Basically, when Darkseid Superman goes evil and Darkseid takes over the Earth. And then you see that happen, and then we're like, they have basically the Superman soldiers, and then you have the parademons, which I thought was actually, I'm like, oh shit, like, this is pretty cool. And then, you know, when you have the Flash kind of come to him in that vision, him coming through the timeline saying, like, you know, like, Lois, she's the key, and then, like, you were right about him. It was basically alluding to, you know, Injustice, where I don't know if this was going to happen in Zack Snyder's version. I know he was building to it, but basically in Injustice, Joker kills Lois Lane, and then Superman basically goes evil because of it, and they basically, like, he takes over the world, and there's like this whole new world order. But then eventually, like, Darkseid comes. It was going to be a combination of the two. And for what I understand, because Zack Snyder has been dropping stuff for years, and listening to Kevin Smith, Darkseid was basically going to come, and he was going to kill Lois Lane in a future movie. And, well, we didn't see it. And maybe it's going to be in the Snyder Cut if we ever see that. But it kind of went with the whole thing of Lois and Clark, this whole thing. It goes in the first scene where after the whole Africa thing, and they're talking, and she's like, I don't know if you could be with me and be you.
Yeah.
And I thought there was a nice little thing where, like, he jumps into the tub with her, and then the glasses fall off. So I was like, oh, shit, you know what I mean? That's symbolism that, he can be Superman with her. And the whole thing where Lois is his world. Throughout the whole movie, Superman has reasons to lose faith in humanity. They basically persecute him. And in the crux of this, there's a religious story. And I mean, everybody could tell, like, the story of Christ. And then, like, even when Lex talks about, like, the picture in his living room where, like, it's Lucifer coming and basically trying to take over, and he said it should be upside down. That's another allusion to, like, Superman eventually going evil. I am sad that as of now we're not going to get to see that happen. We're not going to get to see Darkseid like we should have. I understand how kind of like that nightmare storyline could be jarring for people, but I was excited for it. I'm like, oh shit, like, there's Ezra Miller being the Flash. Like, I've never seen, at that point, I don't think we've ever seen the Flash on the big screen before. And it was like alluding to this bigger storyline. But I understand with a movie that's already packed with so much, it's like, oh wow, they're doing Nightmare, they're doing Injustice.
Yeah, and that's my bad saying that Last Night on Earth kind of took from this. It was on my computer screen, so I'm getting all my Batman storylines mixed up. But the whole idea of, like, this alternate world, that's something that has definitely been done in the comics before. So that apocalyptic scene just kind of took from that. And I was like, oh, okay, I see where he's going with this. I don't think we really need it. But the whole Nightmare storyline, that is one that you're kind of like, okay, I see what you're doing here.
Yeah, it's like everybody's fear in the movies that Superman is eventually going to turn evil. And basically, what are we going to do? Because this guy can do anything. He has heat vision. He has unlimited strength. It looks like there's nothing that can kill him. And basically, seeing that Nightmare version or having those visions is a manifestation of that. That's what happens. Like, if Superman were ever, like, decide to turn evil, that's what our future looks like. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's gonna rule and we'll all die. So that's basically, I felt what, Terrio and Goyer was trying to do when they're writing the story. Like, what happens when, quote unquote, a god turns against us? And there's always that with mother boxes and everything like that, like, there's always that possibility. Yeah.
And even though Last Night on Earth has nothing to do with this, you should read it because Snyder and Capullo are a great Batman team. So
it's another great Batman story.
Yeah. And you just have so many Batman storylines to pull from that. I do like that they went a little darker with the character in this. It just felt like so much happened off screen to get here that it almost feels like we were cheated out of a lot of good story. Not that I necessarily think we need another Joker and need to see the death of Jason Todd. I would have liked to see more of that from Ben Affleck's Batman, because you and I have texted many times before how I wasn't a huge fan of his version of the character, but I think I was mostly basing that off of having seen Justice League more recently at that time.
Oh, man.
So that whole movie was such a mess that it's kind of hard to be like, yeah, well, at least there was this, because in rewatching this, I was like, okay, he clearly put in the work to play this character. He went and did all the workouts, and while he doesn't look like Superman, he comes pretty close with his version of Batman in this. And then, you see Ben Affleck now in something like The Way Back, which I haven't seen, but I've seen the trailer, and you're like, wow, he really did do a transformation.
Amazing movie.
For this movie.
Well, amazing performance by him, I'll say. Like, he one of the things that I hate is that we'll never get to see the Batman movie that he would have written and directed.
Yeah.
Like, this guy's a great writer. When he's honed in, he's a great actor. Like, I thought in Batman vs. Superman, particularly in that scene, like, he's like, even if we have a 1% chance, like, this guy can turn against us. You know what I mean? Like, this guy could evil, and we got to be on the drop of it. When he's talking to Alfred there, it's a crime, unfortunately. And I mean, he has a very small part in Suicide Squad too.
Yeah, very, very small.
Yeah, very super small. And even though, like I said, like, you and I have talked ad nauseum, basically how you are not a fan of Jared Leto, and particularly that Joker, and I will agree with you there. I don't think that we've saw enough, but I was like, do we really need, like, Joker this soon? And especially with Joaquin Phoenix, I don't know if you could really go back to that. But yeah, I that's why, and I'm sorry that I'm bringing this up. That's why I do want to see the Snyder cut of Justice League. What was the full vision of what he wanted Batman to basically be from Batman vs. Superman? Batman kind of gets, or Bruce Wayne gets his humanity back and his urge to do good, and they're on this quest to find the other metahumans. That's another thing that I'll bring up real fast. Like, the theatrical cut where, like, Diana is going through the files and seeing like, all, like, you know, Aquaman and the Flash and Cyborg. I didn't initially like that scene because I'm like, oh, they're just trying to build up the Justice League movie. In the Ultimate Cut, they actually talk about it. It's like the metahuman. And I'm like, okay, now this makes sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and theatrical, I'm like, okay, now we're just seeing other footage of other metahumans out there. And I'm glad that in the Ultimate Cut, they actually have some exposition to set it up.
Yeah, it felt like the cuts they made were pretty crucial to understanding, okay, here is why Bruce and Diana are interacting the way they are in this movie, because without that, it's kind of like...
You're like, what?
In the theatrical one, you're like, wait, why is Diana here? Oh, okay, big battle at the end. That's why she's here. And, you know, while I don't exactly remember what the theatrical one didn't include at this point, I do remember it feeling just really choppy. And you were kind of like, wait, what's the purpose of this? And how did we get here? So it felt like they really should have just released the 3-hour one. But like you said, it was before the MCU really started building up to these longer and longer movies, and really before people were probably wanting to sit in a theater to watch a superhero movie for 3 hours, especially one as dark as this one. It's certainly one that will take a lot out of you by the time you're done watching it, even if it doesn't feel like the Ultimate Cut was 3 hours. But I think that
Superman dies, man.
yeah. Emotionally, it does take a lot out of you by the end, and those emotions can be very conflicting. But even having seen Justice League and knowing that we see him again, I was like, man, this funeral scene is really rough, especially because you have like 2 funerals going on at the same time for him. I was just like, oh boy, this is a lot to take in. And I think if the Snyder Cut did come out at some point, which I'm not super confident it will, I would go spend the time to watch it, just because I am curious what Justice League could have been. And it really feels like things were kind of rocky with Zack Snyder's movies from the start, because you have a very mixed crowd on Man of Steel. This one, it felt like this was the movie that a lot of people hated when it first came out.
I feel like a lot of people are starting to come around on it now, because I'm thinking of, if Batman and Superman wasn't made, will we get Logan? Will we get Deadpool? Like, Batman and Superman was an R rating. You're like, what? Like, a Superman movie's an R? Like, wouldn't that be?
Yeah, because you got some Ben Affleck butt in there.
Yeah. Oh, man, that scene. I'm like, okay. But I
was like, yes, we understand. He got fit for this role. Thank you.
But, you know, the one thing that I can say with DC movies and with Zack Snyder movies is that I'm glad that they take chances. up until maybe Civil War and stuff, I felt that, and still with MCU, I like a lot of those movies. Like you and I have talked about it. Like I think Civil War is an amazing movie. Black Panther, another great movie. But I feel like a lot of them play it safe. Batman versus Superman did not do that. Like it went into, like, love it or hate it. It went to darker territory. It felt like a Batman movie that brought Superman into it. Like it felt like tonally with, the lighting and everything like that. Like it took a lot of chances that I feel like comic book movies didn't really necessarily want to do. And I mean, this movie almost made $900 million. And if you think with Batman and Superman, that's $1 billion, and it didn't. Maybe that's with the R rating, and that's debatable and stuff like that. And it had a $300 million budget, so it made a sizable amount of money. But just like with Man of Steel, I said that, like, maybe Batman vs Superman was a little ahead of its time. It came out at a point where people wouldn't accept it, but as we look upon it, and especially with the Ultimate Cut, now we get it. Like, and now I'm like, the same thing with me. Like, initially when I saw the theatrical, I'm like, I don't get all these story beats. But then as I learned more about film, as I looked into basically like screenwriting, everything, and seeing what Chris Terrio does, which is funny because as we talked about Rise of Skywalker, Chris Terrio also helped write that movie, and they reused the scene that they used in Batman vs Superman, basically with Jonathan and Clark Kent on the mountain. They basically reuse it with Han and Kylo. It's the same scene, but I don't know. It's still going to be jarring because it's very, very dark. And you look at Superman, and even Henry Cavill, who's talked about it, he felt like it's more of a Batman movie. But I feel if you wanted to have Superman to kind of get this trajectory of being who he is, the glimpse that we saw in Man of Steel, you had to give him... It seemed like he had endless opposition here. It was Lex Luthor, it was the people, it was Batman, and then it was Doomsday. It was like, this guy can't catch a break. But, he had to basically sit with the choice, like, all right, he chose Earth, and now Earth rejects him, and now he feels alone. But then again, his world is Lois. Lois is the constant in his world and the reason why he continues to do good. Mm-hmm. And in the theatrical cut, it really seemed that they gave Lois nothing to do. It was like, oh, well, she's getting saved by Superman again. In the Ultimate Cut, she's actually being the investigative journalist that we know that she can be, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little more because we talked about how Lois was portrayed in Man of Steel, and I agree with you. She needed a lot of saving. And even with the Ultimate Cut, I was like, really? We gotta save Lois again? Like, there are at least 3 moments in this where Lois is literally going to die if Superman does not come save her, when she's, going to this sort of terrorist zone, and she meets up with quote unquote Jimmy Olsen, who we know within like 3 minutes is not actually Jimmy Olsen, because let's be honest, if Jimmy Olsen ever looked like that in the comics or the movies, someone would have noticed by now.
People hated it. They're like, oh my god, you guys just killed Jimmy Olsen like that.
It's like, no, he was working with the CIA, people. Come on. And so Lois needs to be saved there. So right at the beginning of the movie, pretty much, she needs to be saved. She needs to be saved when Lex pushes her off the building. And then she needs to be saved like 20 minutes later when she's trapped in the water because, she went in through the kryptonite thing down there.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like, okay, so Lois would have died literally 3 times throughout this movie if it weren't for her relationship with Clark as Superman. So you do get this kind of repetitive thing going, and you're like, okay, can we just have it to where Lois gets this kryptonite spear and she doesn't need to be saved? Like, can we just have one of these moments where she's doing something relatively dangerous and doesn't need to be saved? She gets out of it herself. So it was still a little disappointing, but they did give more of that journalist aspect to her character in the ultimate cut, but it still just really felt like a disservice to the character over these two movies.
Yeah, like I said, like I thought that they gave Amy Adams more to do here, especially like kind of investigating and finding out that Clark was framed basically by Lex Luthor or some force. What I think that they were trying to get to, and maybe this would have been done in Justice League, basically Clark, and it goes with the story that Jonathan Kent does, like, you know what I mean, like the whole story of them saving the farm and saving it from the flood, but at the same time, all these animals die in another farm, and that he has to hear, the screams of animals drowning, and he's like, how'd they stop? And he's like, oh, because I met your mom, and even she says like how she basically alludes to him. She's like, how are you going to save me all the time? You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like when they were alluding to another, Zack Snyder was basically alluding to another movie, I think. Mm-hmm. When, eventually Darkseid kills her, it's like, well, you can't save Lois all the time. You know what I mean? Like, when Clark saves Lois, there's something else that happens. Like, Clark can't be everywhere at once. Like, when Clark is saving Lois, somebody else dies somewhere else. And it's something that Superman basically has to internally battle with. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even though that you want to do good, there's always going to be drawbacks to it. There's always going to be. You can't, you know what I mean? Like, he has super speed, he has super hearing and everything like that, but he can't prevent every single tragedy. And it shows basically when he's in the Senate building, where the explosion happens and everybody dies and gets incinerated, and he's just there. He's like, I can't see it. You know what I mean? Because the wheelchair is outlined with lead.
But he blames himself because he thought he couldn't see it because he wasn't looking for it, when the truth is Lex was smart enough to line it with lead so that no matter what, he couldn't see it, even if he was looking for it.
Yep. It's an interesting dynamic between those two, because it seems that with Clark, he operates on, okay, what is the best case scenario here? And it's funny because you do see two distinct like attributes within Clark and Superman in this movie. Clark is trying to relentlessly go after the story against, how Batman is operating out of this, outside the specter of the law, to the point where Perry's like, get off it. And he's like, we are the press. We are supposed to like follow like the best stories. And another funny thing, like kind of going back to what you said, is there is a point after the Senate where Superman kind of goes away, and that's where Clark kind of hikes up into the mountain. Mm-hmm. Clark Kent is gone for a considerable amount of time. And I would think that, because I think, Perry, when him and Lois like talk about, she's like going to the, she's like, it's not for a story. And then he looks and he's like, get her a helicopter. I'm like, I guess people are catching on that Superman and Clark Kent are the same person, because you have to, and especially at the end of the movie, because
they both die.
Yeah, they're both
magically
dead. So like, all right, like obviously Lois knows who he is, and but I'm like, are other people have to catch on to this too, because two of them are missing at the exact same time.
I do want to end this on a bit of a more positive note, though, because one thing I did enjoy quite a bit from this movie were in particular, the Batman scenes, the action scenes. And with the Batman action scenes, you really get a sense for the place that Bruce has gone to as this vigilante. And obviously, both him and Superman are kind of acting like they're above the law, because they know that what they are doing is for the greater good. It's just Superman gets treated a lot differently for it because he is so much more powerful than Batman is, and everyone kind of knows that. But then, you know, you get the final fight scene, and I think it's fine. I think the whole thing with Doomsday was just kind of adding a lot to the end of that movie, and you already had this story and this sort of struggle between Batman and Superman that was going on that I think was really good. And then you get to the whole Doomsday part and you're like, okay, well, hopefully at least we get some decent action out of this, because story-wise at that point you're kind of exhausted, to be honest. But action scenes in this were some of the really great Batman action scenes that I think we've seen. And while I still really, really love Chris Nolan's Batman trilogy, I think as a whole a lot more than I like the Batman appearances for the DCEU, which kind of no longer exists. It was one of those things where I was like, okay, you know what? These action scenes were entertaining. I got some nice stuff out of them, and those are things that I would want to watch again. I don't think I would necessarily want to watch the entire Ultimate Cut again, but just the way they changed up the Batmobile, and it had obviously all of these guns on it that we're not used to it having, but just the way that it would crash through walls, the way that Batman was fighting, especially when he went to go save Martha. I think that whole sequence there was done really well. And then you have Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman all fighting together at the end. So that's exciting on a different kind of level because you see the Trinity together for the first time.
I think you set me up for the 3 points of the movie, which I think were absolutely fantastic. That Batman fight scene where he's going to rescue Martha, I felt was the best Batman fight scene in movie history. I think that was perfect. I don't know, like, the brutality, even Batman getting hurt, but, like, him kind of, like, coming back, like, perfect scene. The introduction of Wonder Woman with her score, saving Batman from that blast, another perfect scene. I remember when I was in the theater and was watching it, and they like revealed her with that do. Everybody cheered. Everybody cheered. It was an amazing reveal, and I love her character. Basically, when she's fighting Doomsday, and he hits her, and she's like just brushing off. She's like, "Come on, let's do this." Like she's having fun. Like I'm just like, "Yeah, let's go," you know. And it set her up for her own movie, which was amazing. Patty Jenkins did an amazing job with it, and I'm eagerly anticipating whenever we can, you know, God willing, you know, see Wonder Woman 84 in August. And then the third scene, when Clark and Lois talk for the last time, and he's like, "This is my world, you're my world," and he goes to sacrifice himself. Now, I still have the Death of Superman comic in pristine condition from like 92, like hidden somewhere. And I remember how, like you said, there's a lot of story beats within this third act, okay? Like you have Batman and Superman fighting, which I thought like great scene, especially from a cinematography standpoint where it's dark and raining and they're fighting each other, and then it seems like they're going to this cathedral before Batman decides to stab him with the kryptonite. Great scene. Then you have the whole Lex thing, like blood of my blood, like him basically creating Doomsday. I mean, that doesn't happen in the comics, but but it's a storyline beat. And the whole Death of Superman. Now a lot of people complain like Superman has gotten his ass whooped a lot in this movie, like Batman, because the kryptonite, him and Doomsday are trading blows over and over again, and he makes the ultimate sacrifice of, you know, basically getting stabbed by, you know, Doomsday with the kryptonite spear. And, you know, there's that scene where they have the score and he's just lying there with Lois crying over him. And I think there's two crosses in the background, which Zack Snyder kind of pointed to, where it's supposed to be for him. And then Batman in a later movie, because, spoiler alert, at the end of Zack Snyder's arc, Batman was supposed to die. Yeah. And then the whole funeral scene. Like, it's a lot to take in, but that funeral scene is so beautiful. Like, and basically how this whole movie, other than instances of Clark saving people, is dark. It's gray. It's tonally, like, everything is just kind of depressing, and it takes on, as you go throughout the movie, it takes on basically the feeling of Gotham. And throughout the whole funeral scene, there's light. It's still gray, but, like, it's lighter. You know what I mean? Like, where it shows that, like, Bruce is starting to come back to a sense of virtue because of Clark's sacrifice. And then you have, like, Lois, you know, with the dirt, and then the ending where the dirt rises from. And you're like, oh, okay. I would have rather, you know, Zack Snyder cut that. I wanted him to cut that. I was like, I know any comic book fan knows that Superman is going to return. Like, he's going to come back. But I would have rather kind of ended it on that note.
Yeah, especially because you probably knew at this time that they were already planning on Justice League, and you probably can't have a Justice League without a Superman at some point. So
yeah, and then, like, the Justice League promos were all, like, confusing because they were trying to hide like Superman. They're like, well, we can't use him, and then at the end they're like, oh, here he is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like,
yeah, it's a lot to take in at the end for sure. But I think overall, watching the Ultimate Cut boosted my enjoyment of it. And I do want to give a quick little shout out to Jeremy Irons as Alfred, because he does provide some levity with his little jokes that he cracks every now and then. But yeah, this was one that I'm glad I did end up buying and watching the Ultimate Cut. Whether or not I'll watch it too many more times will remain to be seen, just because it is 3 hours of your
3
day.
hours. That whole third act is an hour in itself, and it could be its own movie.
Yeah, definitely. But do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Release the Snyder Cut, man. Just drop it on. We got nothing to do. We're all in the house. You know what I mean? Like, there aren't any new movies coming out for the foreseeable future, even though, like, moviegoers like Deanna and myself would like that done, like, sooner rather than later. You got HBO Max. You need subscriptions. Just drop that Snyder Cut on HBO Max and we will watch it. Give Zach money to finish all the rendering and all the post, and just drop it. Like, it doesn't. Yeah. We've moved on from the DCU. We're not going to see that vision. It'd just be neat to see.
I think a lot of people would certainly sign up for whatever service that ends up on. If it's HBO Max, great. If it's, you know, DC Universe, if DC Universe doesn't roll into that, it's a whole mess right now with Warner Brothers and their streaming options. But I would watch it if it came out, like I said earlier. And it's just one of those things where I'm not going to obsess over it, but I am interested. And maybe one day I will get around to covering Justice League and Suicide Squad and sort of finishing off the DCEU movies. And it's one of those things where, even though I don't necessarily like everything DC did, there are good things to pull apart from a movie as dark as Batman versus Superman. So, Murjani, I am very glad we finally got to talk about this one. I know we've been talking about it on the podcast for a while now, but we finally made it happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a long watch, man. There's a lot that happens in it, and there's a lot to take in. So, you know, I appreciate you kind of like sticking it out for 3 hours and like buying like the actual Ultimate Cut, because the theatrical cut, like, just don't watch it.
Yeah.
Watch the Ultimate Cut.
I would recommend that as well. But before we go, I quickly want to let you all know how you can support Welcome to Geekdom. You can sign up for our Patreon, which you can do for $1 a month. That'll just get you a thank you on the show. $2 a month, you'll get to pick a topic and I'll find someone to discuss it with. $5 a month, you'll get access to the Welcome to Geekdom Slack, which Murjani and I are both on, along with other guests from the show. And we talk about movies, TV, video games, everything that
Animal
is
Crossing.
Also discussed on this podcast. Yeah. And you can follow us on social media at GeekdomPod on Twitter and Welcome to Geekdom on Instagram and Facebook. And as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.